The world is quietly isolating America, and most of you have no idea it's happening. Your passport isn't power anymore. Your dollars are being dumped. Over 70 countries are shifting away from U.S. influence right now. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped to under 59%, the lowest in history. BRICS is expanding. Allies are hedging. And behind your back, the global order is being rewritten without you. This isn't politics. This is your future being erased in real time. So listen closely, because if you don't act now, you may not be allowed to ever leave. The BRICS trapdoor. America's global leash is snapping. Most Americans still don't get it. The dollar isn't just weakening, it's being evicted. Quietly, deliberately, and for good reason. The BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now joined by Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, and the UAE, is systematically building an escape hatch out of the U.S. Dominated financial system, and they've already cracked the vault open. The U.S. once had the global economy by the throat through the petrodollar system. You want oil? You had to use U.S. dollars. That forced every nation to hold our currency, buy our debt, and play by our rules. But now, BRICS nations are launching their own shared currency initiative backed by gold, mind you, and piloting cross-border payment systems that totally bypass the dollar. Russia and China are already settling energy trades in yuan and rubles. India is buying oil from Russia with rupees, and Saudi Arabia just announced it's officially open to accepting other currencies for oil sales. That's a seismic shift. The World Bank won't say it on CNN, but what's really happening is monetary mutiny. It's the Global South saying, we're done funding your wars, your debt, your dominance. If the dollar loses reserve status even partially, it could send shockwaves through every American life. Soaring interest rates, crashing imports, evaporating credit, and a silent devaluation of your paycheck. And the worst part? The U.S. can't do much about it. Sanctions were our weapon of choice, but we overused them. We sanctioned 1/3 of the world's population. Now they're building systems that don't care if Washington throws a tantrum. America called the shots for 80 years, but the world is writing a new script, and this time we're not cast as the hero. The trapdoor is open and the floor beneath the dollar is cracking. You can't afford to be asleep right now. America's moral bankruptcy is becoming a liability abroad. You know what's wild? It's not just America's economic decline that's making the world nervous, it's how we're collapsing morally. This country went from preaching liberty and justice to broadcasting culture wars, book bans, and billionaire worship like it's gospel. And now, that rot is on full display for the world to see. Think about it. The U.S. once sold itself as the shining city on a hill. But now it looks more like a crumbling parking lot, filled with rage, guns, and debt. What foreign government wants to align itself with a country where school shootings are weekly events and political violence is openly encouraged by elected officials? Countries are pulling away not because they hate America, but because they're embarrassed to be seen with us. France, Germany, even longtime allies like Japan are questioning the alliance. Why? Because they don't want the stink of American decline all over them. They can't trust us to uphold treaties, they don't believe our media, and they don't see us as a moral leader anymore. And it's not just perception, it's consequence. In 2023, international tourism to the U.S. dropped 17% compared to 2019 levels. Foreign investment is down. Top scientists and engineers are leaving U.S. institutions for more stable countries. When America made abortion a states' rights gamble and flirted with nationwide book censorship, the EU literally debated whether the U.S. still met democratic standards. We're not seen as progressive, we're seen as unstable. And that's becoming a liability in trade deals, military alliances, and even immigration. Why would a young Brazilian or Filipino or Czech nurse want to move to a place where they might get shot in a Walmart parking lot? Why would a Canadian trust U.S. banks when our own regulators can't even spot massive fraud until after it explodes? America's moral collapse is happening in high def, and the world's watching. But instead of learning, we're doubling down. We elect strongmen, ban TikTok, and pretend the 1950s were paradise. But here's the truth. If the world sees you as the school bully and then you show up to class without your lunch money, don't expect any sympathy. Just expect a punch in the mouth. The new Cold War. America's allies are nervous and planning their exit. It's not official yet, but let's be real, we're already in Cold War II, and this time it's not just Russia on the other side. It's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and half the global South, and they're gaining traction. But here's what most Americans haven't realized. Even our allies are hedging their bets. Germany just signed a massive energy agreement with China. France is pushing for strategic autonomy from the U.S., and Macron has publicly said Europe shouldn't be dragged into a Taiwan conflict just because Washington says so. Japan is cautiously cooperating with China on tech, and Saudi Arabia, once the crown jewel of American influence, is literally holding joint naval drills with China and Russia. Let that sink in. Our own partners are building side exits. Why? Because they know that America is acting like a cornered animal, erratic, wounded, dangerous. Our foreign policy has become a slot machine of sanctions, drone strikes, and threats. But in a multipolar world, that doesn't work anymore. Nations have options. China's Belt and Road Initiative is now active in 150 countries. America offers debt and demands. China offers bridges, railways, and ports. You don't have to like their system, I don't, but you better understand the game being played. NATO's already showing cracks. Turkey's buying Russian weapons. Hungary's cozying up to Beijing. And the global South? They're flat out ignoring U.S. demands. In 2023, at the UN General Assembly vote condemning Russia, a shocking 35 countries abstained, including India, South Africa, and Indonesia. They're tired of being lectured while Americans collapse in tent cities and argue about drag shows. If this keeps going, and it will, we'll wake up one day and realize that our so-called allies have built a parallel system that runs just fine without us. No more dollar dominance. No more military protection, no more deference. The world isn't waiting for America to fix itself. It's building a world where America is optional. And in global geopolitics, optional means replaceable. Sanctions backfired. The world found out. It doesn't need America. You remember when U.S. sanctions were the nuclear option, right? When the Treasury said freeze, global banks froze. When the State Department said cut them off, the world fell in line. But that era is over, and what replaced it is a monster we created ourselves. Since 2001, America has issued over 11,000 sanctions. That's more than the rest of the world combined. But here's the problem. We became addicted to them. Sanctions were cheap, easy, and politically sexy. No boots on the ground, just freeze some assets and call it a win. But now we've sanctioned so many countries, China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, even Turkey at one point, that the world has learned to adapt. And worse, to innovate. When we booted Russian banks from SWIFT, what did Moscow do? They built SPFS, their own payment system. When we tried to choke Iran with trade bans, they doubled down on crypto and barter. When China saw TikTok and Huawei targeted, they started pushing yuan-based trade zones with Southeast Asia. It's like every time we tried to slam a door, the world just found another exit. And now, 2024 and 2025 are shaping up to be the years where the entire global economy quietly and maybe permanently reconfigures itself to function without America. Nations have created their own banking systems, their own internet infrastructure, even their own cloud servers to avoid Amazon, Microsoft, and U.S. law. This is what happens when you weaponize your influence too many times. You lose the trust of the marketplace. We've even seen U.S. Treasury bonds being dumped by central banks. China cut its holdings by $100 billion in the last year alone. These countries aren't just reacting. They're planning. And when you've been the sheriff for 80 years and suddenly no one's listening to your badge anymore, that's not just a shift, that's collapse. So when people say the dollar will always be king or we can just sanction our way to peace, you need to realize the world has already seen the playbook. And it's already building firewalls, backups, and bunkers to never need us again. We taught the world how to live without us, and now we're shocked that they're actually doing it. The Great Expat Exodus. Americans are quietly disappearing. This is the part no one's talking about because the government doesn't want you to know. Right now, more Americans than ever before are leaving the country for good. Not just backpackers or digital nomads, we're talking skilled workers, families, retirees, veterans, and even small business owners. The State Department doesn't advertise this, but passport renewals and citizenship renunciations have hit historic highs. In 2023 alone, over 5,000 Americans officially gave up their citizenship, and tens of thousands more relocated long-term without renouncing. And here's the kicker. They're not doing it out of hatred for America. They're doing it out of survival. Try buying insulin in the U.S. It's $300 a vial. In Thailand, $8. In France, free. Try getting dental work done in L.A. versus Costa Rica. It's literally cheaper to fly there, get your teeth fixed, and vacation for a week than it is to get one crown in the States. Parents are moving to Portugal and Spain just so their kids can go to school without fear of a shooting. Seniors are retiring in Ecuador, the Philippines, even Albania, places they never considered 10 years ago because they can actually afford to live. And guess what? The U.S. government doesn't like that. They're making it harder to leave. FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, now requires foreign banks to report your balances to the IRS. U.S. citizens have to file taxes even if they don't live here. And if you try to renounce your citizenship, they'll charge you $2,350 just for the privilege of leaving. That's the highest renunciation fee in the world. Why? Because they need you to stay. They need your labor. They need your taxes. They need your debt. You are fuel for a machine that's running on fumes, and when enough people start jumping ship, and believe me, the system starts to crack. So yes, the world is turning its back on America, but what's worse is that Americans are turning their back on America too, quietly, strategically, and permanently. The exits are still open, but they won't be forever. The fall of American manufacturing. We don't make anything anymore. You ever try buying something that says, Made in USA? Good luck. You'll find a coffee mug here, a tactical belt there, maybe some overpriced artisan soap, but the truth is America doesn't make anything anymore. Not where it counts. Not at scale. And the world knows it. In the 1950s, manufacturing made up 28% of U.S. GDP. Today, it's barely 11% and shrinking fast. We've offshored our factories, our supply chains, and our technical knowledge. Even our defense systems rely on Chinese-made components. In fact, 98% of the rare earth minerals we need to build advanced weapons, batteries, and satellites come from China, a country we now openly call our adversary. What kind of empire does that? We're literally buying the rope we're going to hang ourselves with. And it's not just about pride or patriotism, it's about survival. The next global conflict won't be one with boots and bombs, it'll be one with supply chains and microchips. And guess who controls those? Not us. Taiwan makes 92% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. South Korea handles another 6%. The U.S. barely scratches 2%. Even when we try to bring manufacturing back like with the CHIPS Act, it's mostly subsidizing foreign companies like TSMC and Samsung to build on U.S. soil. We're not rebuilding an industrial base, we're renting one. Meanwhile, China is churning out steel, concrete, ships, solar panels, batteries, drones, and exporting them at scale to Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia. That's why the world doesn't need us anymore. They don't need U.S. contractors. They don't need overpriced American aid tied to IMF debt traps. They can just order what they need from China faster, cheaper, and without the moral lecture. So if you think we're still the arsenal of democracy or the engine of global innovation, I hate to break it to you, but that was 3 decades ago. We are now a service-based, consumption-addicted, debt-financed economy. We click buttons while the rest of the world builds, and eventually the builders stop answering the door when the beggars come knocking. America didn't just lose manufacturing, we gave it away, and the world watched us do it with a smile, because they knew that was the moment they could finally say, "We don't need you anymore." Global media is cutting the cord. America doesn't control the narrative anymore. There was a time not that long ago when America controlled every major story on the planet. From war coverage to elections, from Hollywood to health policy, the world consumed media that was filtered, framed, and force-fed through an American lens. But now, that grip is disintegrating, and it's one of the biggest reasons why the world is turning its back. Because for the first time in modern history, the global narrative isn't written in English anymore. It's fractured, it's plural, and increasingly it's anti-American. In 2024, China's state-backed CGTN has more international reach than CNN. Russia's RT broadcasts in over 100 countries despite constant bans. Al Jazeera, once seen as fringe, is now a major player in Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. And it's not just state media, it's influencers, researchers, war correspondents, and independent voices all speaking in their native languages, showing the world what America doesn't want seen. The U.S. can't stop it anymore. The world saw how we handled COVID. They saw George Floyd begging for his life. They saw journalists gassed in their own streets, whistleblowers exiled or jailed, and entire newsrooms bought out by billionaires. And then they compared it to the way we preached about freedom of the press and human rights. Now they don't believe us. And it's not just that they don't believe us, it's that they don't need us. Africa has launched its own regional streaming platforms. South America is funding independent Latin-focused news hubs. India now exports Bollywood to 200 countries. American media is becoming a sideshow, a meme, not a moral compass. When Gaza was bombed, it wasn't NBC or Fox News shaping public opinion. It was a 19-year-old Palestinian live streaming from his destroyed bedroom on TikTok. And people listened. And then they acted. Protests erupted worldwide, not in support of America, but against it. And while we screamed disinformation, the world saw truth. They saw pain. They saw hypocrisy. And they chose a different story. So the next time someone says, "The world just doesn't understand us," remember this: they understand us better than ever, that's why they're leaving. When you lose control of the story, you lose control of your image, and once the mask slips, you don't get to put it back on. The empire has no clothes, and the cameras are everywhere now. Food, water, and oil. The world is nationalizing while America still outsources survival. You want to know how a superpower dies? It dies when it can't feed itself, fuel itself, or keep its people hydrated. And right now, while America obsessively talks about iPhones and AI and the next Taylor Swift album, the rest of the world is quietly circling the basics: food, water, energy, and locking them down. Not through trade, through control, through nationalization. Argentina just took steps to limit foreign ownership of farmland. Brazil is investing billions into domestic grain and fertilizer production. Saudi Arabia is buying farmland in Africa and storing oil underground while Americans drain their strategic petroleum reserve for election year optics. China? They're hoarding grain like it's wartime. As of late 2023, they controlled 70% of the world's corn and wheat reserves. What are we doing? Depending on imports from nations we've sanctioned, insulted, or bullied. The U.S. imports 90% of its seafood. We import fertilizers, rare earth minerals, even baby formula. We're not a self-sustaining nation. We're a consumption hub for goods made and mined elsewhere. Meanwhile, the nations we once mocked as developing are doing the opposite. They're building massive desalination plants. They're protecting their oil. They're funding local agriculture. They're preparing for a world where the U.S. dollar doesn't mean you automatically get what you want, especially if you've treated your suppliers like second-class citizens for decades. And here's the scary part. If a country like Brazil or India or China decides tomorrow that it no longer wants to sell key resources to America, we're done. We have no backup plan, no redundancy, no capacity. We haven't built resilience, we've built dependence. And the world knows it. We're not feared anymore, we're seen as fragile. and fragile things get pushed aside when it gets chaotic. So while American citizens are being fed TikTok drama and political infighting, the rest of the world is preparing for the collapse of the U.S. empire, not with weapons, but with stockpiles, pipelines, and sovereignty. That's how you survive when the empire falls, and make no mistake, they're already planning for it. The rise of multipolar empires. The American century is over. There's something happening right now that's bigger than any one conflict, any one president, or even any one economic crisis. It's a shift in global power so enormous that historians will look back and call it the exact moment the American empire ended. It's not about bombs or battleships, it's about structure. The entire post-World War Chartered Order was built on one premise. America is the center. We set the rules. We manage the institutions. We enforce the peace. But in 2024 and 2025, that entire structure is being rewired, and not by us. Look around. The United Nations is being ignored. NATO's losing cohesion. The IMF and World Bank are being replaced by BRICS-led funding systems. ASEAN is forming tighter regional trade deals that don't involve Washington at all. The African Union is demanding seats at the G20. And what's the U.S. doing? Fighting over book bans and banning gas stoves. We're not even in the room anymore. The world has moved on. And it's not even angry. It's indifferent. That's worse. We're no longer feared. We're no longer respected. We're irrelevant to the long-term vision of most rising nations. China has its Belt and Road. India has its digital public infrastructure. Latin America is trading more with each other than with us. The global economy is decoupling, and we're not invited to the next stage. The American century, that post-war dominance where every flight, every dollar, every deal ran through D.C., is over, and we don't have a plan for what comes next. We're stuck in nostalgia, hoping that flags and fighter jets will keep the world tethered to us. But that's not how empires work. They don't end with a bang, they end when the world stops calling. And right now, they've stopped calling. They're building their own world without us. And if you're still here, waiting for things to bounce back, I've got news for you. This is the bounce. Gravity just kicked in. You're the last resource. The system only works if you don't leave. Here's the part that should terrify you. Because while everything we've talked about so far is happening on a global level, trade, war, energy, food, media, the one piece holding this broken empire together is you. Not your vote, not your opinion, your compliance, your debt, your labor, your taxes. That's the real product America exports now. Not freedom, not democracy, just working-class compliance sold in bulk to Wall Street and Washington. You're the engine, and they've made damn sure you never get to leave the vehicle. Why do you think they make it harder to leave than to enter? Why does FATCA track your every dollar overseas? Why are American banks pushing biometric ID and social credit pilot programs under the name of fraud prevention? It's not about safety. It's about containment. You are the last resource this empire has. The middle class has been gutted. Home ownership is out of reach. Healthcare is a scam. Education is a debt trap. And now, they're turning you into a subscription. You don't own anything. You rent your phone, your house, your software, your car, and soon they'll try to rent your ability to move. CBDCs are coming, and when they do, every dollar will be programmable. You'll be locked into zones. You'll be told what you can spend on, where, and when. Why? Because the system only functions if you stay in it and if you never question your role. That's why they hate expats. That's why they monitor foreign bank accounts. That's why they try to scare you out of moving abroad. Because if too many people leave, if too many people opt out, the system collapses under its own weight. They don't need you happy. They need you plugged in. The American people are the last asset left. Everything else has been sold off, outsourced, or automated. So if you're still wondering when it's time to leave, I'll tell you this. It's not just a good idea. It's self-defense. The world is already gone. The exits are open. But they won't stay that way forever. If you're still waiting for things to go back to normal, you're already too late. The exits are open for now, but they won't stay that way forever. Get informed, get out, or get ready to be trapped in the collapse. Subscribe if you're serious about leaving, and I'll show you how before the window slams shut.